Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here with our esteemed panelists along this for industry insights on security and digital transformation. My name is Anshul Kaushik. I am the regional director at Zscaler, and I'm also joined here by two esteemed colleagues from the industry. Maggie, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Maggie Calle, and I'm currently the AVP of Cybersecurity Services at Canadian Tire. I've been in the security industry for over 20 years in different roles at the banks and insurance companies, and I'm really happy to be here today discussing industry insights of security and digital transformations.
My name is Kush Sharma. I am in the industry for approximately 20 years. In cyber and all the domains. I have my own boutique consulting firm and am the former CISO for the city of Toronto.
Thank you, both of you. Great to have both of you here. As said, we're going to be discussing quite a few topics today as we go through. So just from the first perspective, kind of taking up, I want to tell our colleagues that are listening in that please hold your questions. Please put them in the chat room. We will take about 10 minutes at the end of this panel to answer any and all questions for you. So just to get us started, from a perspective of digital transformation, here's the first question from the thoughts of how can security enable digital transformation today and avoid becoming a barrier? I'm just going to add a few thoughts for both of you is in recent times, what we've seen, Harvard Business Review kind of conducted and said that almost 85% of organizations today have in some way or shape taken in digital transformation or are going through that. However, the success rate of digital transformation is only seen between 17 to 20%. Maggie, go ahead.
Thanks, Anshul. So those are some interesting stats, right? So not everyone is successful, but I think there are a few opportunities where security can really partner and play an important role in the digital transformation that many organizations are undertaking. Some of those opportunities are really embedding our security capabilities directly into the value chains and around the organization where the business capabilities and products are being delivered for business outcomes. There are three key opportunities that I've seen, and I have worked in organizations where we've successfully done these. And it's embedding security in the agile development teams, in the DevOps pipeline, so the CI and CD pipeline, embedding our security into robotic process, and also working closely with the cloud center of excellence and basically adapting to their cloud operating models in order to provide appropriate and automated security governance. So these are some key opportunities that I've seen successfully done. When embedding security into the development teams, it's important to keep in mind that we have to make sure that automation is key, right? So starting from the requirements and design phase, the development phase, there are opportunities where we can have with the partnering with the product owners in the agile teams and making them aware, for example, during the requirements and the design phase, that they need to prioritize security tasks and the requirements for security and basically have them accept accountability for it. If the product owners do not accept accountability for security tasks, then that's where we're going to have issues and security issues, and security is not going to be top of mind for the agile teams and the development teams. Another opportunity as well is, I think we've all worked in organizations where there is a desire to have security champions within the agile development teams, and this really helps us so that security have only a number of resources, so we can't really be everywhere at all times. So having security champions within the development teams who can advocate for security, who can help prioritize the security tasks is really extremely valuable. And also they keep the accountability for the product owners to make sure that the security tasks are not being disregarded. There are other aspects as well during the application security testing, right? During the testing phase that if security is able to automate our testing processes and embed it into the pipeline, then the agile development teams will have real-time views of the security posture and the vulnerabilities during every build. So throughout the SDL, we need to, security teams need to make sure that we're integrated into the development processes in the agile environments. And having done that, it really allows us to communicate the roles and responsibilities and really shift left in the SDLC and make sure that security is taken care during the SDLC process versus being an afterthought. So these are really great opportunities that the security and the cyber teams should take into consideration when the organization is going through digital transformations.
Thank you for your thoughts. Kush, I'm going to open it up to you from your side. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Maggie made some excellent points. I'm going to touch on one she talked about. I made a note here saying security champions. And I think it's a very important concept, not only on the operational level, but on the governance and leadership level. I think you have to find a sponsor or multiple sponsors across the business and your partners in IT to ensure that cyber is embedded, to Maggie's point. So excellent concept, good ideas. I think the key is for cyber folks to understand, especially the leadership aspect of it, is what is the actual scope of the transformation. So many times, because the cyber teams are not at the table at the beginning when they're actually scoping the projects out and the program out, we come in later, maybe during design phase or maybe during, after the contract is signed. So we have to try as leaders to get ahead of that curve and be in the scope discussions, right, during the preparation of the RFP and really understand that scope. So when I say scope, I mean the business process scope, I mean the technology scope, and then we have to add the security layer on both of those, right? Because you have the governance aspect of it and the process controls, and then you have the technical capabilities and tools and technologies that we may need to add from the operational perspective. Then I think the CISO or the directors, depending on your organization, need to really have a sit down and a chat with fellow leaders and understand their expectations. So, you have the scope of work, you have the RFP, and you have this idea of where we're going to be in a few years, but what is the specific expectations of every one of those business leaders and the IT leaders? Because likely they're going to be different. And so, you have to get that put on paper and then come up as part of your scope of work, a solution that can meet those requirements or to the best of your ability. And then if there is a delta between expectations upfront, you can address that with those leaders prior to awarding a contract, right? Prior to the actual start of the transformation. And this dramatically reduces your risk in terms of delivery, perception, communications. So understanding the scope, but also now going to the other end is understanding the outcome. So if you don't understand what the scope is and you don't understand what the outcome will be after the transformation has been completed, for example, they're going to reduce, they're going to increase sales by 20% and reduce operating costs by 5%. So if you don't understand basic numbers and basic outcomes, you're just doing things, right? You're just putting in technology, you're just doing the operational aspects of it, but you cannot then map the value for cyber to the business strategy for that transformation. Now, if you know the scope and the outcomes, then you can map everything you do to one of those outcomes, right, and to the scope, and then you could easily translate that to executives, in terms of the progress that you're making and your contribution to that 10%, to the 5%. Another thing that leaders need to think about and really actively push is participating on any committee. So it doesn't matter, if it's a technical committee all the way to a governance committee or executive committee, cyber professionals need to push to be on every single committee during that transformation. And depending on your level, right, if you're analyst or if you're manager or if you're operations based, then you need to be on those technical committees. Because we have to be there to dispel any perception issues And we need to advocate for our own selves. So you can advocate in those meetings and those committees where the decisions are being made. And then, if we look at the program in itself and the transformation, many times I've seen that all the teams have a specific section in the program or project charter. So security is usually missing, or it's part of, included in the IT section, and it's usually written by non-cyber folks. Now, in some of the larger organizations, security is its own function, so that's the exception. But generally speaking, you'll see it missing or part of, multiple different streams. So we need to pull that out and have a separate section for cyber, and really lay out all the deliverables and the outcomes and everything we want to achieve in that project charter, so that it's embedded, right? And this is a specific outcome for the entire program to be successful, not an afterthought. The other barrier that usually, a barrier that we usually face is that, many folks don't understand the language that we speak. And so there's usually on a transformation, change management function. So what we need to do is speak to our change management counterparts, or hire our own on our team, and ensure that they are also looking at change management for the technology teams and the technical folks. So when we implement a tool for cyber during that transformation, that the same change management processes that we apply to the business are applied to our counterparts in technology, because they are the recipients many times of the things that we do, right, in addition to the business. And we usually don't include them on that extra training or the change management function. So these are the very high level, some of more of the governance type of topics that we need to look at in terms of barriers and overcoming them.
I'm going to recap here for a moment from what I heard from both of you, right? And I heard some pretty good things. And us as an organization, when we're working with our clients and so forth, we also see similar patterns evolve and emerge, right? Development of security champions and focusing on business outcomes, not just cyber outcomes, but business outcomes. Along that line, both of you, kind of said that security needs to be embedded across organizations, not just be a singular BU, but across organizations. Am I correct in that statement there?
Right.
Yes, I would say so. Yes.
Yeah. So that leads me to, kind of on the second question, where you've now said, here, these are the things that are needed. And you clearly see that there are challenges in organizations from that. What leads me to believe is, help me understand, what does managing risk generated by transformations mean to each one of you? Go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah. So I think recapping, right, about the how cybersecurity can actually be relevant to the business, right? I think that's a key objective. And so information security needs to make sure that at all times during our transformation journey or helping enable the digital transformation in the business, that we're connecting our objectives and key results to the business outcomes. And so we just discussed that on the first in the first section of this segment. And organizations must also, during the journey, apply quantitative risk analysis for decision making, right? So we have cyber objectives and the business have business outcome objectives. And so what we want to do is, from a cybersecurity perspective, we want to have objectives of risk reduction. And from a business perspective, we want to also connect to their objectives and make sure that we are enabling them for their business outcomes. And at all times, we need to, during the transformation, understand that if people are trying to skip the processes and security itself, then we want to start creating KRIs and metrics very early in the process, right? So for example, when development teams are just starting in the journey of automating their pipeline and pushing things in an automated fashion and builds and so on into the cloud, what we want to do is we want to start measuring types of things that we can see going down over time, right? So one of them would be, if we are, for example, talking about the CI/CD pipeline, in the beginning of our processes, when we embed ourselves into into the automated processes and our security testing is catching all the vulnerabilities, we want to start tracking the number of vulnerabilities, which might be very high in the beginning because of the fact that some of these projects are just being created from scratch, or some of the existing applications have never been tested before. So there will be a very large volume of defects and vulnerabilities that are found. But what we want to show is progress over time where they start going down. So every time developers do a build, then we can see the number of vulnerabilities reducing. If we have security champions and we have training, for example, happening at the same time, doing secure code training for the developers, advocating, sending them into training, putting them into an actual program and curriculum that we can develop with them, then we can start seeing the progress. And every time they do a build, we will see less and less vulnerability showing up. And eventually what we can do is we can move from tracking the number of vulnerabilities, tracking the time that it took to fix them, right? Because remember, they're working in sprints. They're basically building every week sometimes. They're building every 2 weeks and they're pushing things to production. So what we want to eventually do is we want to move into a little more strict scenario where we're breaking the build, right? So initially we're first tracking how many vulnerabilities they have, how long time in average it takes them to actually fix those vulnerabilities. And then eventually, as they get more comfortable with the tooling and with the automated processes, then we can start breaking the build so that every time they build, they just gotta, it opens automatically Jira tickets, the developers fix that, they build it again, and then it's, after that scenario, then there will not be any situations where the code needs to wait for a very long time to get fixed. It just happens at the build time. And so that's kind of like the scenarios where you start a little bit flexible and then you start being a little bit more strict, right? Because then the developers have had the training, your security champions have already been put in place, and everyone is just more comfortable, right? So you can't start too strict because then that's the time when you're going to be seen as a team that is kind of not playing with them together, and it's not enabling them to actually achieve their objectives, and it can be seen as a barrier. So there is some flexibility that needs to be put in the beginning when all these processes are being instituted. The other thing that we can track is the number of applications that are covered, right? So you do need to have some efforts actually into automating some of these processes and onboarding applications, but also in these situations, we also need to onboard people, right? So as you onboard the applications to the different pipelines and tools and the security processes, you also need to onboard the actual people in the team. They need to get the appropriate training to understand how it all works, how the flow works, the processes, where do they go when they have an issue, how, if they need consulting, for example, to resolve an issue. A lot of the time, some of these testing tools give a lot of false positives, and then you have to record them, and the deltas will now no longer show those false positives. So they need to understand, the actual team needs to understand and have proper education and training so that they don't get frustrated during their onboarding of their application into the processes. And then the other item and metric that can be tracked is really the time that it takes to resolve the vulnerabilities. In the beginning, it might take longer because the teams didn't have the appropriate training. As they get more educated with secure code training, then they can actually, their ability to fix these issues will increase. As well, if they're using more IDE development tools, like linting tools, then they will not have as many issues showing up during the build time. So I think these are just some key items that need to be taken into consideration. But these metrics, when you start and you're part of a digital transformation program, you want to show that progress captured with quantitative metrics so that people see that at the beginning it was potentially really bad, But then in the end, as people get more used to the processes and security and the development teams are working together, then you will see the metrics improving a lot, right? So that's basically from a metrics perspective and managing risk, right? So presumably, and I know that we discussed earlier that there will be some committees at a higher level, and Kush mentioned a lot of those things are important. So presumably, we want to be able to report on this in a quantitative measure. I don't know if Kush, do you have anything else to add to?
Yeah, no, those are excellent points, and the metrics I think are key. So I was wondering, Maggie, for the metrics perspective, what's your kind of golden frequency for reporting that out? Because I think it's very important to understand that and show leadership that we're fixing and working together in a collaborative manner with our counterpart. Can you maybe? I'm quite interested to understand what your ideal frequency rate is for reporting.
Yeah, and that's a very key question, right? I was part of a program once where it kind of seemed daunting to have the metrics produced on a weekly basis. And so initially we started kind of producing on a monthly basis, and it wasn't producing, like you will just see things in red, right? Like things were on the red zone, and so it was just too long. And even our counterparts, they were like, "Oh, can we know this in advance instead of like every month?" And it was a lot of work to kind of create the actual processes that pick up the data so that you can have the nice dashboards and so on a weekly basis. But we were able to do it, and the teams and the support and the coordination and collaboration between the teams increased dramatically, because now every week everyone was looking, and we had live dashboards, so people will go and check, like before even the week ended, and before we cut off the dashboards, people will go and check, and they were interested to see how they're doing, right? Like it's almost like real time. And we used to load, during certain time of the week, a day of the week, we load all the results and the data, and people were very interested to go, the minute that the data was loaded, to see how they're doing and performing. And so it kind of actually keeps the teams engaged, because they want to know how they're performing. When people have the mindset of the agile mindset, they really want to know things real time, right? So having reporting like on a monthly basis, or perhaps on a quarterly basis, is kind of detrimental to the efforts of agile, because things are happening very, very quickly, right? So the agile mindset is like they just want things real time. One of the items that I mentioned earlier, right? Testing, having the ability to embed the testing tools into the pipeline, it gives the ability to the product managers to at any time go and find the status and the posture of that particular application with respect to vulnerabilities, right? They don't have to wait or ship the code over to somebody else to do the testing. It just happens as part of the processes. So it is extremely important to have, if you have the ability to provide data on a very regular basis and frequently, that should be done, because it really increases even sort of like the competitive spirit of the teams, to see how they're doing against other teams as well, right?
I see. No, that's interesting. Thank you for that, Maggie. I would say from a risk perspective, and I'm gonna just look at from a governance perspective. So communication is a risk. I think Maggie has done a good job in her example and her efforts, where they're communicating real time from an agile perspective. So that's excellent. I think communication needs to be a key component of your risk mitigation strategy as a cyber executive. So you have to figure out the right frequency and the right timing. Many executives probably will give you 10 minutes to 15 maybe. So you might get 1 or 2 meetings a year from some of them. So you have to really be focused and concise on what you're actually going to present to them. The other communication aspect that I found we need to improve on as an industry is we need to customize the communication. So we usually have information and we present the same information to legal, to procurement, to finance, but there's slight nuances, right, in the risk, and they're really interested about what's going on in their business. So for example, you're looking at financial risk versus legal risk. If you go present the facts and figures and metrics regarding finance to the head of legal, that conversation is not going to go well. So you have to talk more about procurements and contracts and regulations, compliance, right? That message has to be given in that format. For finance, you need to look at and map to the general ledger or the balance sheet or the income statement, etc. So you have to look at, what is the downside of doing something. So if we put this technology in and we don't really look at security, we do 50% security, well, the chances of breach might be 70%. We've seen it in other competitors in the industry. So the likelihood, of getting breached for us in the first year is, with all the calculations, 70 to 80%, which means, $1.5 million in losses. Because the insurance won't cover it. We didn't do our due diligence. There'll be a fine. There'll be some reputational loss. We'll lose. We're going to assume to lose 2% of our business, etc. Now, this information is extremely hard to get. You have to work on it. It takes a little bit of time. But if you can get to that level, the conversations will be more meaningful. The other key risk from an organizational perspective is really culture. And so this is one of the biggest challenges all of us have in our industry is how do we integrate with that culture, right? The mindset is not security focused. And rightfully so, right? We're looking to innovate, bring new products out. We're trying to, increase revenue or provide services if you're a government. So we have to keep that in mind, and we have to slowly adapt ourselves to the culture and build those relationships, be a trusted and confidant, and then tweak the system, right? So then slowly make the adjustments. If you come in right away with your 10 rules off the road, it's likely not going to work. So you have to adjust to every specific leader in the organization. If you could customize that trust, so if you could customize how that culture works. So for example, I was in a organization and we worked with the CFO's office, and a lot of them were traditional kind of accounting tax type folks, right? Very to the rules, and you have to have that mentality, right? So there's no leeway either way. So you have to work in that construct. And then in the same organization, right, we were with another partner in the business who are always creating new products and the customer side of the house. And so they're doing campaigns, they're doing marketing, they're putting up new tech all the time. And with them, it's completely different way to deal and get integrated with the culture, because they're about innovation, they're about moving things fast, they're about thinking about outside the box. So you cannot be in the box. You have to be outside of the box when you're coming up with your security solutions. So the culture, although usually stated in an organization, actually, in my experience, varies between the various divisions or organizations. And you need to customize that in your organization. So in the cyber organization to succeed, you need to find the right people on your team to put into those roles. So if you have folks that are really compliance focused, and we all do, an audit focused, well, put them with, in this example, it was finance. And if you have other folks that are completely thinking out of the box, coming, maybe threat hunters, they're looking at all kinds of different things and new scenarios to come up with to see if someone's trying to attack you, they might be best suited to deal with those lines of businesses that are more innovative, that would look at different ideas, right? And they're not going to ding you if you fail, and help you through the process as a partner. Prioritization is another risk from a leadership perspective. So you will often find everyone across your organization will come to you at the same time, all the time, And all these things need to be fixed, looked at, risk assessment done on, technology implemented. And so with the lean teams that most cyber organizations have, or most organizations and governments have, you have to be willing to prioritize with those leaders. And so one approach that I've taken is you group all of the projects or initiatives or any sort of tasks that are opportunities for you to build that relationship within a specific unit. So let's take finance, for example. Then you prioritize the finance activities with the finance folks. Now, if you go cross, so if you go finance, procurement, legal, order to cash, transportation, whatever it is, then there'll be some conflicts because now you're trying to prioritize things that you don't own across different leaders, and that is a recipe for disaster. So sometimes a better approach is to take the 10 or 15 projects for, let's say, finance or supply chain or what have you, go to them and say, okay, we have capacity, right, to support 7 of the 10 in the next 6 months, and after 6 months we can do the rest, we can do the remaining 3. So can you please prioritize these for us, and we will work on that priority. And then you do the same exercise for each, whether it's IT or legal or whichever unit it is, and then they're the ones actually prioritizing their work for you. And so then there's less let's say conflict, right, in what you do, and you're seen as someone trying to help them. Most people are very reasonable, right? So if you could do some of the things they're asking, and if the remaining things that you cannot do, you can find a solution for, whether it's jointly getting an external party to come and help to accelerate that, or prioritizing it later in the year, or maybe working with other divisions to maybe come up with the solution holistically, because you have the picture of the entire organization. Whatever the case is, I think that this is something that that we need to look at as leaders to mitigate our risk to the extent possible.
Thank you, Kush. So I heard some interesting things there too, right? But what I got from Maggie was education and training, significantly important in an organization. And both of you kind of talked about communication, right, to help mitigate risk or manage risk from a transformation perspective, were key importance. I think those are the 2 key things that I saw from both of you in this conversation. And to add to that, when we work with clients as well, we're seeing this as well, because as we innovate as Zscaler, as we bring out new technologies, this requires a certain mentality of change, right? As both of you mentioned, is kind of how do you address that change? It's a cultural shift. How do you communicate those things, and how do you educate around those things? Which leads me to my next thing, right? If you understand this change and you're helping try to manage that risk transformation from that perspective, what are some of the things that need to change from a cyber team perspective, operating model perspective, in order to support digital transformation? Maggie.
Yeah, so I think it's important to realize that security cannot work in silo, right? So if the rest of the organization is moving to digital transformation and agile operating models, we also need to understand where in our teams we need to adjust our operating models, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the entire and all the domains of cyber, but at least key domains of cybersecurity, right? We need to influence the adoption of our security services within these new digital enterprises. And this can be done partially and in key areas. So there are many companies that are going through digital transformation. They're repatriating services from vendors. They're changing IT operations. They're replacing the traditional waterfall methodology to agile methodology. They're giving developers self-service access to cloud infrastructure, right, to accelerate things. And many organizations are actually getting rid of their data center to adopt cloud services. So security cannot stay behind and static. We need to also change according to what our organizations are doing. And so therefore, because there is a lot of re-engineering of processes already happening, I think that lends itself as a perfect opportunity for cyber to re-engineer some of our processes and also integrate into this new ecosystem. And we can do that, by thinking about the consumers, the business outcomes, who are consuming our security services, and who are those, in the agile terminology, who are those personas that are going to be using our services. And some of those might be, the regular users, like Kush mentioned, like people in finance, people in the business, or even marketing. They don't have any technical skills, and therefore our lingo, we spoken earlier that we speak a different lingo. And so how do we actually make sure that they understand security, that they're security aware? And so we need to start catering to those different personas. And there is a large spectrum of them, right? Because then there is the very technical people in the infrastructure teams, or the development teams, that they truly understand technology and understand security. And we want them to have those security champions and be security advocates for us. So we need to be catering to different people. Kush mentioned this earlier as well, right? Like, we can't have the same talk about security that we have with the development team as the one that we're going to have with the marketing team, or people who are selling services themselves that need to prepare perhaps RFPs or RFIs, and that we want to help them win the deals for the organization, right? So there is different discussions that we need to have with different types of consumers within our organization that are using our cybersecurity services. So in that regard, and to your question, Anshul, yes, cyber needs to change our operating models in many different areas. And so organizing our teams into agile scrums or Kanban around the value chain, and also where the agile teams are actually producing products that directly impact consumers out on the street, and that are contributing to business outcomes. I think it is very important for the cybersecurity teams to change and organize ourselves surrounding those processes. And that includes potentially, very recognizable services that identity and access management is one of them. Application security, I've spoken a little bit about in the previous segments, and cloud security, right? So those are very key processes that we need to adjust our teams and change the operating model for those. At least if we're going to start enabling and partnering with the business, those are key areas that we should be focused on. Additionally, we also need to think about our recruiting practices, right? There were times when people thought that only pen testers could join security, right? And that is farther from the truth nowadays, because we have a very large spectrum of different skill sets required in information security. We have people that come from communications, from education, that can actually help us to do training and awareness programs. People from law undergrads, or that can help us to do regulatory matters with cybersecurity. Extremely important, right? And then we still have all our pen testers and our offensive type of skill set people. And so now having these agile mindsets and agile skill sets is really important as well for our team. So our cyber teams need to start recruiting people that have those skill sets, right? So our spectrum is only going to get bigger, because we need these people that can come and complement our skill sets. Even the development teams have gone as far as appointing their business as the product owners, right? Because the business are the people that know what they should be doing, or how the product should be, the roadmap should be developed for the product. So they're now coming in and helping the development teams to drive that roadmap for the products that they're servicing for the actual customers. So in the same fashion, we should be thinking from a security perspective, right? Who is the next in the chain the value chain, and that's the developers, right? So now the developers are linked to the business managers who have become their product owners. So security should be thinking about bringing or even recruiting people from the development teams, if not appointing them to be the product owners of our services, because they can incorporate our services into their ultimate product that is being released to, or the features that are being released to the actual customers. So these are things that we need to think about from a recruiting perspective, and complementary to what we've already seen in the past, where security went from being a very hardcore skill set, hard skill, to also incorporating soft skills into our spectrum of needs that we have for folks joining the cyber teams. Another thing that I think is important when thinking about how do we operate in the cyber operating model is moving from a ticket-based approach, right, where everything that comes to security is, I need a firewall rule. Do you have a ticket? And that needs to change, especially given the fact that we have a lot of the new solutions that have API interfaces for our security services, right? So we have lots of, and I think there were some sessions as well this week on certificate management, right? With the rise of APIs, how do we manage certificates? It's not going to be done manually. So this requires automating every possible interaction and integrations that we have with cybersecurity and software development tool chains, right? So vulnerability management, application security, or many things, firewall rules, can be automated through the use of APIs. Another aspect that we can think about in terms of how we operate in our operating models is really tightly integrating with the actual end users across the organizations, people that don't know anything about security, right? People that are non-technical, and how do we position things that services that they might need, right? Like the USB accesses, typically, that we make it for them to be a nightmare because we don't want them to have access to those. But how do we actually engage with them in training and awareness as to why not, right? DLP is another aspect, right? We block many emails. They don't understand why, so they need to have the ability to understand why is it important to do that, and the ways that we interact with the regular users in the organization that are non-technical users, I think needs to improve via more intuitive processes and friendly processes, right? Another aspect is helping the organizations that are adopting cloud services with cloud native security models, so that it doesn't take a year for a service in the cloud to be activated, right? Because we're trying to gimify things that don't really work versus just using cloud native services, and have our sort of I think one of you mentioned about risk assessments, right? And how do we risk assess services in the cloud quickly and build the security guardrails necessary for them so that it's ready and available, and every user can now use this new service available in the cloud. So really important to work at the speed of the cloud as security teams. And I will mention the last aspect, right? Collaborating with infrastructure and architecture teams to standardize patterns, right? That's extremely important. If you already know that a pattern is secure, then users can just come and use it. You don't need additional security risk assessment because it's already an approved pattern. And that, is something that we need to start doing especially in the adoption of analytics, RPA, because of the fact that those areas are moving really fast. So we need to have predefined security patterns that are secure for use across the organization.
You ready, Kush?
Yeah, I'll continue on Maggie's theme of having a different operating model or different thinking. So we have to focus on and have a business-centric kind of mentality. And our operating model has to go from doing the widget work, right? Oh, I did 15 tickets today and I'm done, right? To hold on, did I service the business, and did I provide some sort of value to them, right? And how do we quantify that? So the business model, what I've done in my two former organizations is really change it. And the mindset of saying no, has to disappear. So I think we have to accept some risk, and we have to, as risk professionals, we need to understand that we need to accept risk sometimes ourselves, right? So that means even our deployments have some sort of risk, because you cannot remediate, or you may not be able to remediate every single issue prior to going to production and going live. As long as you have a plan of action to mitigate, high and critical, and then work on others after, it could be potentially acceptable, right? It depends on the scenario. But we have to think a different way, and we have to understand how important that product is. To Maggie's example, she was talking about building products, how important that is to the business. Is that specific application that they're building going to generate, $50 million in revenue in the first year alone? Just a hypothetical. If that's the case, then if there is a breach, what's the cost of the breach for that new application? Well, if the cost of the breach is going to be 10 million, then the business may want to take that risk. I think it's not up to us to decide on that. I think we need to be advisors, provide the options, right? You don't do anything, this is the risk, and this is what the impact is. If you do something, it mitigates your risk X percentage. And if you do everything, then you might delay the project a little bit. So they can decide as a business how much appetite they want to accept. Now there's guardrails. So I'm not saying it's a free-for-all. They're sending passwords unencrypted on the internet. No, well, that's not going to happen. But there's some guardrails that we put in place where they have a parameter, right, to maneuver. So when we look at the traditional domains of cyber, right, we have, identity and access management and threat management, et cetera. I think we need to reorganize how we structure our teams to change into that new business-centric mindset. So there's complementary services within the various areas of cyber. And to Maggie's point, it's dramatically increased, right? There is no such thing as threat hunters before, right? We didn't have communication people and change management people on cyber teams before. So we have to look at it in a different way. And I always talk about Amazon and how we have to take some of the good things from that model and bring it into cyber. So, we have to go to the business or technology teams. They basically tell us the requirements, right? They click some things, and then it comes into the warehouse, right? So for us, it's our team, and we manage everything, right? We figure out internally between our different teams how this whole solution is going to work, from the risk management GRC folks all the way to the technical folks that are going to do the implementation and the configuration of the tools. And we come up with a holistic solution, and then we package it with options, and that's what we present back. So they give us something, a few days later, it goes into the machine, and then all they see at the end is a nice, a nice gift, bow tied, wrapped up, and here's the options. So they don't see all of the middle piece, right? So all of the technical stuff, the architecture, the solutions, the negotiations, the contracts, everything, we look after and take care of. And so and it's very difficult to move to that mentality, but if you slowly do it, you'll see the improvements in terms of the varying opportunities your team members get, because they're not only doing the same thing all the time. The collaboration internally within the cyber team, right? So, folks that are in the SOC understand what the GRC folks are doing. The GRC folks understand what IDM folks are doing versus the privacy folks, critical infrastructure, et cetera. So they start working together in that supply chain, let's say, to Maggie's earlier analogy, but the cyber supply chain within your own team. And so what do I mean by we have to look at different ways to deliver and restructure the teams? Well, a good example is we built a team called Digital Trust. And we took identity and access management, digital identity, privacy operations and risk assessments for privacy. And we put it all together, and data protection, and we put it in, all of those complementary skill sets into one team called Digital Trust. So now they can solution, right, the identity and access management aspect of it, digital identities, privacy, these all related to each other. They can solution it together as a team, and then they have the capacity then to move it to architecture, to design, build, test, deploy, all within that team. And so they have privacy folks there that can advise them, right? And so that's one of the examples. Another example is business application resilience. So we built a team that focuses on all the applications. So it's not a separate or a siloed or organization where it hops from one security team to another to another. The business application resilience team, we're in charge of all applications and all security for all the applications. Many of these applications, many of them are in the cloud, have specific nuances in terms of enterprise application security. And so you need some subject matter experts that live in that world, with addition of some cloud folks, etc. And that team would look after everything from segregation of duties, business process controls, governance controls, entity level controls, technical controls, which we're used to, and then doing any implementation of any systems that relate or in the business app world. And so that sped up the process to deliver custom applications, existing off-the-shelf applications to the business with our technology partners quite rapidly. So these are some of the things that I think we need to think about. It has worked for me, but it depends, I think, on the organization. Even if we take a little bit of this new concept and apply it, then I think you'll see some value being added, and you'll see that you'll be invited to more meetings. You'll be invited, your executives will be invited to steering committee meetings to help shape the strategy, because they'll see that you're able to deliver. And once you can deliver, you'll be asked to take on higher level authorities and responsibilities that move into business process, that move into governance.
Thank you, Kush. Just keeping the time in mind, time check. I think, let me kind of say something. From what I've heard from both of you today here is, from a barriers perspective for digital transformation, is we really need to work across the board to communicate well, and then make sure that we have a plan to mitigate risk from that perspective. So it can't be a siloed approach, but a broad approach, bringing in new talent to address some of the new innovations and challenges across. Is that an underlying statement, both of you, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right.
Okay, thank you. So it seems like we have a question on the chat. I'll read it out. It's to both of you, saying, I spent much time creating a crosswalk matrix to identify the roles of whom a CISO must escalate, inform, and seek decisions from. I've searched extensively for such a document where I could validate my own matrix. Are you aware of any such definitions or scholarly definitions and so forth, documents in your careers?
Well, I've created such documents, but I don't work for those organizations anymore, so I don't have that capital, but I do have it up here. So I'm happy to have an offline conversation with you. I'm not sure who that is, but CyberS could set that up.
Okay. Thoughts, Meg?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I did my MBA on and focus on corporate governance and basically the relationship of the risk management folks with the board and so on. So there is a lot of scholar papers related to corporate governance, and I think there is a great accountability from the board of directors in terms of having oversight and due diligence on cybersecurity matters, and to the extent that today we want to make sure that every board has at least a couple of skilled people in cybersecurity so that they can truly understand risk. There is a lot of scholar papers that on Google Scholar. You can find it on Google Scholar or any university websites that what are those accountabilities and how the CISO, I think that's to the question of the person is the CISO should be escalating and be transparent in the reporting to the board of directors on the issues that they have, or the lack of potential resources or accountabilities that the organization might be lacking in terms of funding the teams appropriately, having appropriate risk management oversight. But there is just one task that the CISO must do, and that is being able to articulate with appropriate quantified metrics to the board so that they truly understand the risk and that they can actually help to accommodate the appropriate budgets for cybersecurity.
And I think that matrix needs to be customized. So there's two scenarios in my mind. One is the CISO is reporting to a CIO, and the other one is the CISO is reporting to someone else. So it's another executive or directly to the CEO. So in both scenarios, you can't have the same matrix because politically you'll be committing suicide. So we can talk about that, but another day. But I think we have to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I know it goes back to the communication that you both have alluded to. We've got another question. Do you think government organizations are prepared for the scope and scale of digital transformation as it's today? So, Kush,
yeah.
Go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah, I think Anshul, you started this session with some stats, right, from very good sources that pointed to, I believe, it was only 17% of successful digital transformation efforts. And so it's difficult. I being part of a few of those in the different organizations where I work. It's difficult because what we're trying to do is we already have a very stretched thin cybersecurity workforce that is working and they're incorporating frameworks from regulatory bodies, the NIST standards. We have so many different inputs, and the threat landscape obviously is one of those. And now we're also trying to incorporate this agile mindset, right? That and it's very it can be heavy in processes, right? You require ceremonies, daily stand-ups, very good governance, backlogs, and so on. So unless the organization is willing to provide complementary resources that have those skill sets required for digital transformation to complement the security subject matter experts, it might be putting a lot more strain on a workforce that is already strained, that needs to know and have a deep knowledge of many different subjects and domains, and we have to keep up with the speed of changing threat landscape. So do I think the government organizations are prepared for the scope? I have not personally worked in government organizations, so I don't know. But what I can say is that in the financial and the financial sector, the insurance sector, and the retail, I have seen many digital transformations take a toll on people if it's not executed accordingly with the appropriate skill set and resources required, specialized resources required to manage those transformations.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but what I would say is that I'm happy to have a discussion with the person that posted the question offline. I think from a government perspective, they have started that journey, but there's a long way to go. And the way that the structure of the government is and the budgets and the financials, I think it's a progression, a maturity that has to be looked at over the next few years.
Okay, I think we're up on time. I want to thank both of you for your time today. Really appreciate your thoughts and insights. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.